When I was 19, I used to work as a pizza delivery driver. For context, I'm a female. I would only work on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. I always preferred the weekend shifts, especially at night, because that's when I would make the most money. At this point, I'd been working there for the past year and had come to know many of the regular customers that I delivered to. On one particular Friday, I had just gotten back from a delivery when my boss handed me another box of pizza to deliver. I instantly recognized the address, seeing that it was a lady who almost religiously ordered pizza every Friday night. According to my manager, she'd been doing that for years. On the job, I've learned that a lot of customers like to chit-chat, and this lady was one of them. I didn't mind though, because she was always very kind and would often tip me very generously. She lived on her own and would always tell me she enjoyed having the house to herself since it was quiet. Her house was 10 minutes away from the shop, so I got in my car and drove straight there. It was around 11 at night, which is around the same time she'd always order. As soon as I got there, I pulled into the driveway, parking behind her red Kia Optima. I noticed that her front porch light wasn't on, which was unusual because she always had it on in the past. I assumed she must have forgotten to turn it on as I reached over to the passenger seat to grab the box and take it to her. As I was approaching the house on the walkway to the door, I instantly froze in my steps when I looked up and realized that the front door was wide open. There were also no visible lights coming from anywhere inside the house. It was completely dark. Hesitantly, I took a few more steps forward and stepped up on the front porch, where I leaned my head in towards the entrance and yelled, "Hello? Is anyone home?" I waited a few seconds, but got no response. After seeing that the front porch light was off, I didn't really find anything too strange. But after noticing the fully open front door and complete darkness inside the house, I really started getting scared. I found it hard to believe that all those strange signs were just a coincidence. As a last hope, before I escalated the situation by telling my boss, I stepped inside the house and began calling for her. In retrospect, this probably wasn't a good idea, but I walked around the first floor of the house, looking for any signs of her. My only explanation at this point was that she had a medical emergency of some sort and needed help. I made my way into the kitchen, where I found another red flag. Her phone was sitting on the countertop, right next to the sink, and her car keys were on the coat rack by the front door. Other than that, there were no signs of her. I thought about checking the upstairs level and basement, but I was starting to get freaked out. I ran back out to my car, where I called my boss. While waiting for him to answer, I started getting really worried as I soaked in everything I had just witnessed. I got a nauseating feeling in my stomach that something was seriously wrong. My boss finally picked up, and I stumbled over my words, trying to tell him that I think something bad happened to her. He told me to come back to the shop and talk to him more about it, because he was busy with customers. I sped back as fast as I could, where I practically ran inside to attempt to tell him everything in a less panicked tone. After talking with him, he agreed that we should contact the police and have them send over someone for a welfare check. Well, weeks went by, and we heard absolutely nothing from the police. The suspense and ominous tension was killing me, not knowing what happened. Several more weeks went by, which turned into years. I eventually quit that job and worked my way up into the career job I have today. Last month, by coincidence, I ran into my old boss from the pizza shop. We struck up a conversation for a little before I finally brought up the elephant in the room. I said, "Hey, whatever happened to that girl?" His expression quickly changed into a blank look, and he sighed. "I don't know. She hasn't ordered a pizza since that night." Later that day, I decided to drive over to the house I delivered to that night. There was a truck and a car parked in the driveway, and a lady sitting outside while her kids played in the yard. I parked on the street and walked up to the driveway, waving at her. I said, "Hey, I know this is kind of a weird question to ask, but do you know anything about the previous owner of this house?" She looked puzzled as she replied, "No, not at all. Our realtor said that the house had been abandoned for a year before we moved in." I politely thanked her and walked back to my car with that same feeling I had in my gut years ago the last time I was at that house. I still can't believe that after all these years, I still have no idea what happened to her. She just dropped off the face of the planet. I'm hoping that there's some logical explanation for this that I'll eventually find one day, but I just hope she's doing okay. I'm 22 years old and a current student at a university. I share a house with 3 of my friends, and although the rent isn't much between the 4 of us, everything seems expensive when you're in college. This past summer, I started doing DoorDash deliveries to make money on the side between my classes and homework, making just enough to pay the rent. It has its perks, since it allows me to work my own hours, whenever I have free time. I thoroughly enjoyed it much more than working a regular minimum wage job. My entire opinion changed this past month. It was nearing the end of the month, and my rent was due within the next week. It was a Saturday night, and I was at home watching a movie with my friends. I got a notification from the Dasher app saying that there was $3 peak pay for the next 2 hours. For anyone who is unfamiliar, DoorDash will occasionally offer peak pay, which basically means that you will get a monetary bonus with each delivery you complete. So when I saw that the peak pay was $3, I quickly got up and hopped in my car, promptly leaving to get some good orders. It was a fairly busy night, and I was already up to $27 in my first hour working. The orders were coming in non-stop, which is pretty typical given that it was a Saturday night, and I was just outside a big city. My thorough content and pleasure at this point quickly shifted into an undeniable, horrified state of fear. I was parked in my usual spot, which is close to several restaurants, when I received an order. As soon as it popped up on the screen, I knew it was a good one and took it. Generally, the best orders to take are the ones that give you twice the amount of money for miles you're required to drive. In this case, it was an $18 order and 8.7 miles away. I had to pick up the order from Taco Bell, which was only 2 minutes away from me at the time. I walked in, grabbed the order, which was ready to go, and headed for the address that the app gave me. The order's name was under Steve, and the drive was 15 minutes away, mostly on the freeway. It wasn't taking me to a great neighborhood, but at the time, I would have gone anywhere for good money. As I turned on the street, just seconds away from the address, I noticed that the neighborhood was unusually dark, which made it significantly more difficult to find the house. The addresses were written on the houses, so I slowly drove, squinting at the numbers, barely being able to make them out. I finally found the house and pulled into the driveway. I checked my phone, noticing that the order instructions said, "Hand it to me, don't knock or ring doorbell." I tried calling the customer, who went by Steve, to notify him that I was out front, but there was no response. I followed up with a text, hoping he'd come out so I could get going. Minutes passed, and I started considering leaving the food on the front porch, then driving off. After contemplating doing so, I decided that it wouldn't be worth the risk to not follow the instructions, since DoorDash will often ban you or give you a contract violation. I called DoorDash support to let them know about my situation and ask what I should do. As I was waiting on hold, I got a text from Steve. It read, "I'm inside, come hand it to me, front door is unlocked." My heart sank as I read it, realizing it was probably some creep. At this point, I've been waiting outside of this guy's house for 10 minutes, so I reluctantly hung up with support and walked up to the front door. I opened it and took a step inside and yelled, "Hello?" I got a response that came from upstairs, "I'm up here." I couldn't believe this was happening, and I slowly started walking up the creaky wooden steps on high alert. As I was almost at the top of the steps, I heard what almost sounded to be a metallic clanging noise coming from one of the rooms. Hearing that was the final straw for me, so I dropped the bag on the steps and started running down. Right as I did that, I instantly heard fast-paced footsteps that sounded to be coming towards the steps. Steve, or whatever his name was, screamed at me to stop in a blood-curdling, angry tone. I didn't turn back or hesitate for a second and ran straight to my car. As I pulled out, I could see him peering through the blinds as he watched me drive away. My heart was racing a million miles an hour, and I drove back to my hangout spot to wait for more orders. As I sat there, my mind played out all the possible scenarios and motives that this guy may have planned. Each one became more terrifying than the last. To top it off, within 30 minutes after completing that order, I received a contract violation from DoorDash, saying that Steve told them I never delivered the order. I instantly called support and explained to them what happened, but they literally did nothing to help me and wouldn't get rid of the violation. I truly believe my life was in danger that night. He clearly wasn't disabled after hearing his fast-paced, pounding footsteps. That was the last time I ever used DoorDash, and I never plan on doing it again. I try to do DoorDash deliveries as often as possible in between my full-time job as a mechanic. It's an easy way to make extra money with little to no effort. I usually sit right out in front of this burger joint near my house because it's notorious for getting tons of DoorDash orders. On Monday night, after working, I closed up shop and decided to do a few deliveries before I went home. I went to my usual spot and waited for an order. After 5 minutes, I received my first order for the burger joint I was parked right in front of. It was a pretty decent order. I think it was $8 for 4 miles. Anyways, I stopped in, grabbed the order, and brought it back out. I got the directions for the address and started driving. It was in a city over, and I was pretty familiar with the area. When I was 5 minutes away, the directions took me into a large wooded area where there were several hiking trails along the road. I kept driving as the road ascended up a large hill, then steeply dropped into a ravine area alongside. The road finally flattened out, and I continued along the pitch-dark road with my high beams illuminating everything in front of me. When I was less than a minute away, I started getting confused, expecting to see a house coming up. As I neared the location within 500 feet, I quickly realized that the address wasn't a house, but a nature center. I pulled into the small parking lot, promptly calling the customer because the building was completely dark. I sat there, waiting for him to pick up, as I started to think that he gave me the wrong address. There was no answer, so I shot him a text, letting him know I was here. He instantly texted back and told me that he was inside the nature center. I responded, telling him I was coming to the door now. I grabbed the bag and got out of my car, looking to each side of me into the woods, definitely a little creeped out. I knocked on the door and heard footsteps on the other side, walking along the creaky wooden floorboards. However, after a couple seconds, I realized that the footsteps sounded like they were getting further away. I stood there for a minute and texted the guy again. This time I got no response, so I considered just dropping the order in front of the door, then leaving. Suddenly, as I was just about to mark the order as complete and go, I heard a twig snap in the woods just to my right. I froze up, trying to hone in on the sound and make out what it was. As I squinted my eyes at the woods, I was starting to feel extremely paranoid, as I felt an overwhelming sense of being watched. Just as I began to think it was nothing, I heard the sound of snapping twigs, which I quickly realized were human footsteps. The footsteps grew louder and faster, and I dropped the bag, sprinting towards my car. I turned my car on and made a hard right in an attempt to practically do a donut out of the lot. As my car turned, the lights illuminated the woods, providing a clear view of a bearded man, dressed in black, hiding behind a tree. I took off as fast as possible, not wanting to look back. That was enough for me to end the dash, and I went back home, pretty shaken up. I'm not sure what that guy's intentions were, but I can't imagine they were any good. That order was the last time I ever did DoorDash, and I don't plan on doing it again.